Hey there! If you want to learn how to catch all of the good tips and tricks of decorating cookies like these, check out this video. I'm Leslie with Leslie's Cookies and Treats, and decorating cookies is my Poke Power. So I'm outlining an oval cookie here with a 15-second royal icing in white, and I touched down to start my outline, and then I lifted up my piping bag and I'm following along with my icing where it's dropping rather than watching my piping bag. And once I have the outline done, I'm just going to go ahead and flood it in, and then I'm actually using my piping bag to get the icing out to the edge. I'm not squeezing any more icing out here, I'm just moving the icing around. I'm kind of using my piping bag like a giant scribe, and now I'm just going to go back in and pop any air bubbles and make sure my cookie is smooth. And then I let it dry completely, and I'm going to stencil on a background design. You don't have to have a fancy shaped cookie in order to make really neat character cookies. You just need an oval or a square or any cookie cutter shape that you have, and you can still get your design on there and make it really neat. So I started by laying down a piece of silk screen, and then I put my stencil on top of that, and I just set it in the Sweetest Tears stencil holder, and I'm just going to use my icing here to kind of go along where the stencil is, and then I'll use a boo-boo stick from the Cookie Countess, or a thingamajiggy, I think it's called, to spread my icing around and make sure it goes all the way through the stencil and down to the cookie, and I'll just wipe off the excess. The reason why I'm using a silk screen here is because I don't want it to be really thick. I just want it to be the background, and the silk screen helps keep the edges nice and sharp. So I let my cookie dry completely, and then I used a projector to transfer a design I found on the internet of Hitmonlee. This is my nephew's favorite Pokemon character. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And I'm just using some royal icing in a 15-second consistency to pipe in the little sections. And I'm going to skip a section, and I'll let this dry before I pipe in the sections that are in between. This way it will create clear separation between the different layers of icing. And I'm going to let those dry while I come down here to the middle toes, and I'm just going to pipe a ball or a blob, and then I'll use my scribe to bring that out to a point so it looks like a claw. And we'll let that toe dry while we move back up to the eyes, and I'm just going to outline and flood in the eye following the shape that I drew on with my projector, and I'll use my scribe to make sure that that icing is smooth. And I'm going to immediately put in another oval of icing and use my scribe to kind of bring it out to a point on both sides, and then we'll add the pupil. This is a wet on wet effect, and all of this icing is going to dry together. Wet on wet just means that we're putting wet icing into icing that has not crusted over yet. And so the icing I put down in his legs has already crusted over, so I'm going to go back in and add the rest of it now. I'm working with a detail consistency royal icing, so that crusts over pretty fast. And I'm letting other sections of icing dry before I go back and pipe anything next to those sections. And I'm speeding through this video a little bit. This is a little bit more detailed, and you probably aren't going to be making a Hitmonlee cookie, but I did want to show you the process of how I go about deciding what to do. And if you do decide you want to make a Hitmonlee cookie, you can probably follow along with this, but if you have any questions, just go ahead and drop them in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer right away. So while the legs and the toes dry, I just want to pipe in some lines here of separation. I'm going to go over them twice. I'm going to let those little lines dry. Now that the toes have dried, I'm going to come in and pipe in the different color for the top of his foot, and I'm going to do that on both sides. And I'm going to use my scribe on every single section to make sure that the icing gets all the way down to the cookie and that there are no air bubbles. And now that my outline has dried that I put on before, separating those little areas, we can go back to his body and we can outline the rest of it and go ahead and flood that in. I do not want to pipe over the top of those little lines that I made before, and I also want to be careful not to pipe over the top of the eyes. So I'm going to use my scribe, or you can use a toothpick, to move most of my icing around and get it out to the edges, and to carefully go around the eyes. And you can see I'm being really careful here not to go over the top of that line I piped before, and that will leave some separation so that we can kind of see that there's a little bit of a crease there where his arms come off of his big old massive body. And I let that dry, and now I'm coming back in and I'm outlining and piping in his hands. I'm going to over pipe his hands so they stick out more away from his body so they look like they're coming at you. So I'm just going to pipe this layer on now, and I'll use my scribe to settle it down. And then I'm going to let that dry while I move on to other areas of this cookie. And in between each one of these areas, if you do need to wait for it to dry before you continue, be sure to put it in front of a fan or in a dehydrator so that you don't get any air bubbles and it crusts over quickly. And so you see here, I'm outlining his hands, and I'm just piping another layer on top. And this is just making his hands pop away from the cookie more and give it more dimension. So it looks like his hands are coming at you. And once I finish with this, I'm going to let this cookie dry completely. And now I'm just going to go back in and add a little shading following the image that I was able to find on the internet, and kind of just add the shading exactly where it is on the image. So to do this, I'm using food gel colors, and I'm also using food grade glycerin, and I'm mixing them together. This creates a workable color that I can blend out into the cookie so that it's not just a line that dries without being able to blend it or spread it around. I can also erase it if I want to, just by washing off my paintbrush and then drying it off, and then I can just use my paintbrush to wipe away any mistakes or color that I get where I don't want it to be. So I'm going to put some color on, and then I take a dry paintbrush and I blend it out until I get it looking just the way I want. This also can create a nice airbrush look on your cookie without having to buy or use an airbrush, because you can blend it out so it's a nice, smooth, graduated area of shadow. And I'll leave a list of the products I used in the description. And like I already mentioned, I mix my food gel colors with a food grade glycerin rather than a vodka or an Everclear or even the color solution more often than not, because it does allow it to have a longer dry time, and I can work with it and put it where I want it, rather than just putting down a line with the color mix with vodka. It dries almost instantly. You can't erase it, you can't move it around. So if you know exactly where you want your color and you're not worried that you're going to make a mistake and you don't need to blend it, then mixing it with an alcohol works great. And these are the finished cookies. These are my nephew's favorite, so it's the centerpiece of his birthday set. And I hope you liked this really speedy tutorial on how to do a more intermediate cookie design. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you next time.